Again, appreciate the opportunity to present some information here with everybody. I should mention that my father's from Tonga, Namuka in Hawaii, and my mother's from the wonderful land of Idaho Falls, Iona. She's a farm girl out there, and so I had the chance to be. I was born and raised in San Mateo, California, and all eight of us siblings out there. I'm the last of the siblings, and the caboose and things. So, but we had the chance to. Susie reached out to us and asked us if we would present a little bit of information on a chapter that Jake and I had the chance to collaborate on. And I'd be remiss if I were not to recognize all the contribution that Jake made to the chapter. It would not have been possible without Jake for this chapter to take place. And so I'm forever grateful for all of what Jake did to make this happen and to move this forward. Also, just want to make sure to recognize those who are native to this land in Utah, Salt Lake City, and recognize all of our ancestors that have come before us to make it possible for us to have the good lives that we have today. And so with that, would like to begin this specific session here by presenting you some scenarios here. And if you have somebody with you that's next to you, maybe you can discuss these items here. And if you have some thoughts on these questions or these scenarios, if you can type those thoughts in the chat, that'd be great as well. So here's scenario one. Let me minimize my screen here. Okay. Shone and Mele are a newly married couple. They're both the oldest child among their siblings. One day, Sione says to Mele, "My cousin needed to borrow $100 to fly home to attend a family gathering, so I gave him the money." Mele seems visibly distraught, which frustrates Sione because he thought it would be okay to give the money to his cousin. After all, family comes first. It turns out that this was not the first time that Sione gave money to a family member without giving Mele notice. So as you consider this specific situation here, this scenario, I'd like for you to consider the following questions. And if you have a neighbor with you, it'd be great to discuss, or we can discuss here. So if you were to help this couple, this newlywed couple, what factors do you think would be important to consider? Now, I'll give you a little bit of time to gather your thoughts. And after thinking about this question, I have a follow-up question. If you were to provide some type of education for this couple, what type of education do you think would be helpful for them? All right, so as you consider this situation here, what do you think? Anybody have any thoughts about this situation? What factors we would need to consider into to this situation? Okay, yeah. How long have they been married, right? Who do each of them define as family? Yeah, great, this is perfect.
I feel like you took this fictional scenario right out of my newlywed life.
Well, definitely very common, but definitely just finances, just having some type of financial plan or what are their ideas about we all come from different cultures about who pays, who handles the money, who manages the money. So just trying to consider what their frame of reference is when it comes to money. That's always something that a lot of times couples don't really are taught, but you kind of have to face it when it happens.
Yeah, that's a great point, right? Different frames of reference, right? And who might handle the money. Yeah, it's a big deal, right? Also here, another item here. So what are their ages? Is this their first marriage? Yeah. So, here, I'll bring the scenario back on the screen. Here. So, okay. All right. And so, and I'd like for you to consider here that second question, and you don't have to answer, but think about to yourself, what might be helpful for this couple here as we consider their situation, and what might be helpful for them in terms of education processes. So let's go to the next scenario. Okay, scenario 2. Pita, who is 16 years old, comes home acting very strange. His mother, Seini, notices that he smells like alcohol, but she does not say anything because Pita is the oldest boy in the family. Seini wonders what her son has been up to and what she can do to help her son. Here's some questions to consider. If you were to help this mother, what factors do you think would be important to consider? And similar to the scenario before, if you were to provide some type of education for this mother, what type of education do you think would be helpful for, well, I should say for her, right? So let's maybe just dissect maybe some of this scenario here. What factors are important to consider in this scenario? What are some of the important factors that we would say? Yeah, right. What's her role as mother, right? Does that also perhaps maybe include a person who has a discipline, right? Um, maybe it's only father that disciplines, right? Um, yeah. Oh, sorry. Here looks like I had some things that, and perhaps if I were to give you a multiple choice type of option here, right? I'd ask you the question, right? In this situation, what should Saini do, right? A, smack Pita in the head and yell at him for drinking alcohol. Right? B, have a conversation with Pita about the negative effects of drinking. C, tell Pita that he is going to get it when his father gets home. D, ask Pita why he has been acting strange and smells like alcohol. Or maybe there's another thing that Saini can do, right? And so I'd like for you to consider here, right? What are some different options here? And we don't have to share all the options right now, but just consider what are some different options. Maybe there's another way, right? And perhaps maybe we might be aware of some ways that have been some ways that parents handle certain situations like this. Right? Okay. Another scenario. Samson notices that his girlfriend Delilah likes to talk to other guys while he is around. This really bothers Samson, but he feels like he cannot talk to Delilah because because it would make him look weak. Here's some questions to consider here as well. If you were to help, if you were to help, if you were to help Samson, what factors do you think would be important to consider? And what type of education do you think might help Samson in this process here? Okay. And I'll go to the fourth scenario here and we'll continue forward. So Devita or Vita and Julie are an interracial couple who love each other more than words can describe and have been married for 20 years. Vita comes from a Tongan background and Julie comes from a Palangi or Caucasian background. Vita is frustrated because Julie likes to voice her opinion about difficult topics in a way that seems confrontational to Vita. Julie is frustrated because every time that she would like to engage in a conversation about difficult topics, Vita seems to withdraw emotionally. Vita and Julie would love to voice their thoughts and opinions. However, both are at a standstill on how to proceed and have had this happen since the beginning of their marriage, 20 years. Here's some questions to consider, similar to the other questions, right? If you were to help this couple, what factors do you think would be important to consider? If you were to provide some type of education for this couple, what type of education do you think would be helpful for them? Some of the reasons why I bring up these scenarios is perhaps maybe this might sound familiar, right, to some individuals. Perhaps maybe you've experienced it yourself. Maybe you know family members who have experienced these specific situations as well. And in writing this chapter here, this helps us as we consider these specific scenarios. It helps us to think about very real life situations that individuals are experiencing in Pacific Islander communities. And when we consider our field of family life education in the family sciences, and that's the department that I work, or the program that I work in at Weber State is the Family Studies program. We in family sciences, we consider different types of help for individuals and families. And this kind of goes on a continuum, if you will, different domains of family practice. one domain of family practice for professionals is family life education, and that's what we focused on within this chapter. That's the main lens for this chapter. And then the second domain of professional practice is family therapy, and then the third being family case management. Essentially, what you can do is you can look at this in terms of family life education as a preventative measure, education before the problem exists. You can see that in each of these examples, it can easily escalate into something in which we might consider to be a violent situation. With confrontation, sometimes in Pacific Islander families, if there's some type of confrontation or someone feels threatened, sometimes it can escalate rather quickly. And you can see within each of those situations, whether it might be a newlywed couple, a mother and a son, a newlywed couple, or a couple that's dating, sometimes we see that these specific situations can be extremely uncomfortable for individuals to manage. And this is where perhaps a family life education type of process can help out by helping individuals learn specific skills and how to deal with these different difficult family situations before they arise or when they arise, how to deal with difficult topics to discuss, how to deal with adolescent children who are acting in deviant ways. And so that's one lens in which we consider helping individuals and families. The next route is family therapy. And this is when individuals are going through difficult experiences, they're in the middle of it. Let's say if a couple has perhaps maybe had some type of infidelity, or if there may be some type of abuse within the family, then family therapy may be the best route so individuals can learn certain tools to deal with the trauma that they've experienced in the moment, and with perhaps a marriage family therapist or a counselor who works with families. And then going to family case management, where perhaps there may be judicial processes that are involved with the family. And so we have these individuals, let's say that if somebody had to be incarcerated for some specific things that have taken place in the past, then with a family case management, they would work with a case manager and help them deal with these specific issues following whatever is taking place in terms of judgments and settlements. And so with this chapter, we focused on family life education and broadly defined, well, you can say this is a specific definition. Family life education, or FLE, is the professional practice of equipping and empowering family members to develop knowledge and skills that enhance well-being and strengthen interpersonal relationships through an educational, preventative, and strength-based approach. And I'd like for us to consider this strength-based approach, and we're going to touch on this a little bit more towards the end of the presentation today, because I think that there's opportunity for us in Native Hawaiian, Pacific Islander cultures to focus on the things that we do well, rather than perhaps maybe having a deficit approach and focusing on the things that we need to fix. And so I'll focus on that perhaps maybe towards the end, but it's important to have both approaches to help individuals move forward and have healthy and strong relationships. And so when we think about family life education and what it encompasses, some individuals might consider receiving certain certifications that have to do with different parenting programs. There are different parenting programs such as how to raise an emotionally intelligent child, or parenting with love and logic. How to raise an emotionally intelligent child basically is a program that's used to help parents use a style of what's called emotion coaching to help the children learn how to express their feelings and their emotions, which then has been shown to help children learn how to regulate their emotions. So let's go back to that example when we have the couple, right? Samson and Delilah, who are dating. And let's say that Samson is really angry because Delilah is talking to other men in front of him. And so with this example here, perhaps if we would hypothesize that if a family is able to help a child recognize their emotions and work through their emotions, then it will help them to regulate their emotions so that perhaps they do not go maybe from 0 to 10, maybe it's from maybe 0 to 2, and then they might have a conversation with their significant other, right? So that's one way to consider, and some different certifications that are involved with being certified in that type of parenting program. There's also parenting with love and logic. This specific type of parenting style and certification allows an individual to help parents know how to help their children learn through natural and logical consequences. What might this look like? Well, this might look like letting a child, and this may be counter to our culture. In essence, letting a child fail, right, so that they can succeed later on. What does that look like? Well, let's say if we go to Pita, right? Pita, let's perhaps say that Pita sleeps in for school, right, or is sleeping in for school. Sometimes, giving a child the opportunity to face the consequences of saying, well, if you're late, right, to school, then you're going to face the consequences, and maybe I'm not going to stick up for you there. You're going to face it, and then if you like those consequences, then maybe you're going to continue on suffering those consequences until you figure it out for yourself, that you have to set your alarm clock and wake yourself up, right, so that you can then be better prepared, because when you enter the real world, right, no one's going to wake you up for your job, right? And so that's some of the philosophy behind parenting with love and logic. There's also a couple relationships. There's one called Prep 8.0, which helps couples deal with difficult situations or just interactions, so that they are able to have healthy communication patterns. And then there's also No Jerks, the No Jerks curriculum. This can be available through Utah State University Extension. And this essentially helps individuals identify what a jerk might look like, or a jerkette, if you will, and to avoid dating an individual who has unhealthy type of relationship patterns, so that you can recognize those things that an individual has, those perhaps qualities that will not be fruitful for a healthy relationship. Now, this is not saying that nobody's perfect, that everyone should be perfect, but there are some things some very telltale signs that will help you identify whether or not you're going to enter a healthy relationship or not. And so there are different ways that individuals can enter these, certify or move forward in being certified in these specific education items, and then relate these items to a community in which they are involved with. Specific to National Council on Family Relations, there is the Certified Family Life Educator certification, and that's recognized by the National Council on Family Relations throughout the United States. This is something that's specific to our program at Weber State University, and there are 10 content areas in which we focus on, in which we help individuals be versed in these items so that they can then provide family life education to those within the community. Those 10 content areas are families and individuals in social contexts, internal dynamics of families, human development and growth across the lifespan, human sexuality across the lifespan, interpersonal relationships, family resource management, parent education and guidance, family law and public policy, professional ethics and practice, family life education methodology. The two that I focus on within our program are parent education and guidance and professional ethics and practice, in addition to human growth and development across the lifespan. I guess so 3 areas that right now currently courses that I'm teaching. But these specific 10 areas help somebody be well-rounded so that they can then help individuals in these situations. Now, I will note that a lot of the programs may not, what's the best way to say this, may not be tailored to Native Hawaiian and Pacific Islander populations, which then let us know that there's some work to be done in adjusting some of these things to account for individuals within our specific population. What it keeps in mind here, and what I'd like to, the overall philosophy of these backgrounds here, or family life education background, is family systems theory. Essentially, we say that there are tenets and principles that are associated with family systems theory: equilibrium, feedback, and circular causality. Essentially, what we say is that, in essence, from a family systems perspective, no one can act in isolation. everybody acts, and as everybody acts, it impacts the rest of the family. What we tend to see is sometimes with perhaps maybe therapy or maybe certain programs, what you do is you take the individual out of the family system and you treat the individual. The issue is that when you treat the individual and they enter back into their family system, many times, if changes have not been made within the family system, the individual will go back to those same patterns in which they were engaging in beforehand. And so by having a family systems approach, it's more of an approach where you look at the entire family and you figure out what type of things are happening within the family, what type of events are happening within the family, and how can we make some adjustments to not just what is happening, but how things are happening. And so so if somebody has an argument, how does that escalate? What does that look like? And so rather than just focusing on just the what and perhaps what they're arguing about, because maybe they're arguing about finances, maybe they're arguing about their relationship, maybe somebody's staying out too late, maybe somebody's going to Faikava too much. And so it's not just what they're fighting about or arguing about, but how they are doing it. And so by recognizing the how, so is there a quick escalation? Does one person, do more of the arguing or the other? Does somebody stonewall and just shut themselves off to the other individual? What does this look like? And can we put some things in place to address the how, to make sure that the how is perhaps maybe improved so that there are healthier ways of communicating moving forward. And so to our chapter here, perhaps as we think about this chapter, we look at the participants and the context within this chapter here. We noticed and we mentioned that the participants and the ones that we were focused on within this chapter are Native Hawaiians and also other Pacific Islanders who are living in the United States. We typically tend to say that family life education needs to be mutually beneficial, collaborative, and one that builds trust and rapport. Now, there are some really great programs that are here in the state of Utah, and I'll turn the time over to Jake to review these items here, and then we'll continue forward. But let's see here. So there's this first program here. So Jake, if you could take it away.
Thank you, Keith. I really appreciate the background, the context that was just shared in terms of kind of the basic framework model behind family life education. It's not something that I was familiar with prior to being invited to participate in this project. And so it was very interesting to me as Keith and I went through various iterations and drafts, talked about what content should be included, there's a limitation on the page as to how much we would be able to actually share, even though there's such a breadth and a wealth of knowledge of assets from our community-based lens and culturally relevant lens that could be shared. That process in itself was quite an adventure. And so I'm happy to take the next couple of slides and just share on some of the intervention designs and some of the programs that we felt had some tenets and some really great lessons learned that could be shared in a very practical format. And so, introducing the context and the model and that framework and the theory behind family life education was obviously important, but being able to show how these same tenets can be used in a practical, real life way in settings that have evidence-based and evidence-informed methodologies. We felt that was going to be very important in showing in the chapter. And so one of these programs was It Takes a Village. And one of the reasons why we chose It Takes a Village, which is a program that started here in the state of Utah and is now actually being adopted by other health departments and other community-based organizations in other states, and was recently selected by national pediatric and maternal care organizations as a promising practice, as one that's evidence-based. And the reason why I really like the lessons from It Takes a Village is that it takes clinical Western guidelines around maternal care, around prenatal care, around birth outcomes and infant mortality, and it frames it within a Pacific Islander cultural context, which is opposite of how we tend to do things in public health, which is, okay, we already have an evidence-based program. It's already been implemented across the whole state or in this whole county. So why don't we take a couple of cultural themes and maybe translate a couple of the words, and we'll throw that inside the model. And that's something that never has set well, and and the evidence base and literature, shows it is a less effective or a less efficacious way to deliver curriculum in a culturally responsive context. And so It Takes a Village actually flips that on its head and uses the culture as a framework to fit Western clinical guidelines into. And that's a really encouraging project, and one that it continues to grow and continues to maintain itself because of the methodology and the way that it really does suit with and align with our communities that we're trying to reach. The next one, which is the Westside Leadership Institute, is a little bit of the previous model that I talked about, in which there's already an existing program which is running. In this case, the Westside Leadership Institute is a college curriculum class that is offered to community members in a way that they can get a college transcript. They can actually enroll through the University of Utah, and they can actually get credit without having to go through the typical steps of being admitted to the university as a traditional student. And one thing that we did was, initially this was only offered in English. There was a Spanish language class that was added a couple years ago, and myself and a couple others were able to actually were invited and given authorization to translate the manual and the curriculum into Samoan, which proved quite difficult because translating words is one thing, but translating concepts and translating applications and translating the theoretical intervention required much more than just changing one word from English into a corresponding word in Samoan. And so being able to teach this class in person, and then because of the pandemic, in a hybrid virtual format, taught us a lot about engaging individuals and in how do we teach leadership by using some of these mainstream, evidence-based type of curriculum, but also relying on and basing our curriculum in Pacific Islander themes around leadership and around developing community engagement, civic engagement, and all those type of things. And so this is another fun project. This is ongoing. I'm teaching the course, the English language course right now, this semester, and continuing to get more ideas and more practical solutions that we can then integrate with our Samoan language class. We're looking at a Tongan language class as well. And we felt that bilingual context was necessary because we didn't want it just available for fluent English speakers. We also wanted to have an intergenerational approach. And so by having it bilingual, Samoan and English, we're able to get folks who were our grandmother's generation, as well as young folks who are just out of high school or just starting in college. And that intergenerational mode of learning was one that is proving very successful, and we hope to continue to improve on that. Kava Talks, earlier today, you folks had a whole breakout session just on this in terms of, from the founders of this particular initiative. And this is one that we highlighted again because it is one that has been shown to be culturally responsive and also has linguistic appropriate components to it. But at the same time, there is certification involved, and there is, there are pieces that are your peer-reviewed, quote unquote, evidence-based models and theories engaged as well. And this was really one that, because it's been sustainable for all these years and continues to grow and continues to launch other initiatives and other breakoffs from it, we thought was one that would be compelling to include in the chapter as well, as one that really does exemplify the kind of model that we're trying to promote in terms of family life education, in being able to bridge generations and bridge culture and bridge language.
Great. Thank you so much, Jake, for sharing background on the practical aspect of these different programs. And one of the things that I really appreciate too about Kava Talks is the concept of men holding other men accountable. I remember having the discussion with Susie about the program, and just thought, you know, what a great concept, and the way that Semi was able to both Susie and Semi were able to think about how to come up with this program, and going and attending different Kava circles to let them know about ways to treat family members, and also to invite them. It's just a unique approach, and all the three programs that Jake had mentioned, very culturally responsive. And so as we move forward here and we think about, and a lot of what we wrote in the chapter, you can even say was written to individuals who may not be familiar with Pacific Islander culture or even protocol. And so some of the things that we had mentioned here is that for each family life educator who's going to work with Native Hawaiians or Pacific Islanders, they need to make sure that they are able to build a relationship of trust, and making sure that respect is something that's of making sure that respect is known and sought after. And so just and also understanding that individuals, not everybody in the islands are the same, right? Different populations, different languages, different customs. And so the age-old type of adage of, and I remember Jake mentioning this here, that no one cares how much you know until they know how much you care, really rings true with Pacific Islander communities and families. And so as we look at these different practices, we say to ourselves, well, what's a responsive way to be able to move forward here, right? How can we be effective with these families, right? Of course, and Jake had just outlined all these items here within those specific programs. And so we say to ourselves, right, so kind of what's next, right? What do we do next, right? How do we apply these specific principles? And I'd like for you to consider yourself, if you were to create a program that focuses on healthy family relationships for Pacific Islander families, what would that program look like? And so we discussed some things for you, right? We've discussed some things in terms of, you know, with maternal health, education, Kava Talks with, you know, with decreasing domestic violence, right, within the home. And like for you to consider this here, and I would like to open it up to you as well. If you could create any type of program that focuses on healthy family relationships for Pacific Islander families, what would it look like? What would be necessary to include?
Yeah, I'm really interested in hearing from Puna and Robert as well. Robert's worked in American Samoa, and both of you have really robust connections in community in regards to relationships and counseling and those type of things. I mean, in your experience, you know, what do you folks see as some of these themes that should be included or considered when we're talking about programs and interventions?
Yeah, I'll share some stuff about some of the things. I think you know, one of the things that we're trying to do even here in the islands is you know, mental health in general is still a challenging issue on educating, yeah. But one of the things we do in not only try to educate, but also try to make our help our people to understand why, you know, why there is some resistance, right? It's not because, you know, we don't want to, it's not, but there's a reason why there's some resistance, because of the system and the way that the culture was set up, right? The certain things that were put into place about, you know, communication and communication only going one way, right? There's a reason why all of those things were put into place, because in the environment before, it helped to keep kind of the culture not pure, but to keep the culture as it was intended. But as more influences came in, right, it's a lot more difficult to control all of that information. So a lot of the, even with our culture, with our elders, they're still trying to control that information, but yet our people are being exposed to it regardless, right? So instead of trying to control the information, it's trying to understand. And one of the things in our efforts in trying to educate people on mental health is just trying to educate people on emotions, yeah, on our feelings, right? That's something that that's not really taught in our culture, right? And it's something that the more we understand just how we operate as human beings, right, then we have a better understanding how us as human beings operate within our culture. And then when we understand, how we operate as human beings, we're able to make the necessary changes. So I know I have a lot of stuff in my head, but I'll just keep it really short. One of the things that we're trying to do, at least for me, is just trying to teach people how their emotions, even in regards to, for instance, our sexuality, right? Understanding how our sexual feelings manifests itself, right? The reason why I mentioned that is because that is something that's very, very taboo to discuss, right? And it's something that you think about. We think about when we grew up. How did we learn about these kind of issues? And we learned it from our own friends. We learned it from society. We learned it from everywhere else, instead of having a discussion with our own parents, the families about it, right? Even women, right, in our culture, expressing the femininity sometimes is frowned upon, right? Girls are not able to have their hair down, right? Things like that. Things are just normal. Even when I talked to my wife when she was going through puberty and just developing her breasts, right? She was made to feel feel embarrassed about natural human development, right? So things like that. Is I think about things like pornography, right? Pornography, where we don't really understand that our body has natural tendencies and urges and how it manifests itself, yeah. But when we don't understand that, I think about, I never had a discussion with my parents about anything about pornography, right? The only thing they said was just don't do it, right? Don't look at it, don't do anything about it. I was never taught that I have natural feelings that occur when something is stimulated, right? And when I see something stimulating, right, and things like that. But because we don't talk anything about that, we don't even have a healthy discussion about our natural human development, right? So that's something I think that would be very important to add into, because even right now, kids are exposed to pornographic images. Even we have a lot of kids who are on devices, and the ads on these devices are easily can easily just pop up these pornographic images and things like that. And so I've even had to have a discussion with my 5-year-old about it, something that I never thought I would need to. But my first inclination was I wanted to fussy him, right, to sasa him. And I realized that no, it was an opportunity for me to educate him. And I think that's the same thing with our parents now, is that instead of resorting to a lot of how we used to respond, but we just have to have a discussion and educate on how we are responding in the environment that we are in. So that's sorry.
Such a great,
yeah, sorry, I had too much in my mind.
Such a great point about how we frequently stigmatize what is natural development, yeah, and because of that we avoid conversations. And yes, very compelling. Thank you so much for that. Just a couple minutes left, but we want to hear from Puna with your responses here to the question that Keith has posed, and any suggestions on where we continue to go in this work.
Thank you for everyone's comments. I want to provide some context to my comments as a national cultural specific technical assistance provider. So my role, my job is to provide our cultural specific programs that serve Asian and Pacific Island communities with the knowledge, the research, the trends, the data that impacts how we serve victims and survivors of all types of gender-based violence, including domestic violence, from our culturally specific, linguistically diverse communities. With that being said, some of the cool things I've been able to do since I began in my role this past June was hosting listening sessions with our Native Hawaiian Pacific Island community, both in the territories and here on the continent. And a common theme across projects, programs, in all the different types of listening sessions where the composition, right, of these sessions were quite diverse just within our Pacifica community in terms of race, gender identity, sexual orientation, religious affiliation, was this focus on targeting our prevention and intervention efforts around violence to the family unit, to the family system. And it doesn't, that for when we're speaking to each other as within our community, that doesn't sound like something that's new or novel, but culture specific organizations exist because the mainstream movement, the mainstream service provision community does not understand that. And I'm gonna speak boldly, even in communities that we perceive to be very family oriented, they do not necessarily understand the nuances of what then that means within a Native Hawaiian Pacific Island community. Because even within our community, we are not a monolith, we are incredibly diverse.
Right.
So I think ways to support connection. So connection in multiple levels, just within our Native Hawaiian Pacific Island community, within couples, within families, within the larger clans and villages, across our diaspora, in different settings where we congregate, where we learn, where we worship, where we share our ancestral knowledge, where we practice our traditions. I think that at the very least, what I've learned thus far in listening to our community across our US diaspora is supporting spaces for connection. Because we learn collectively. We share, we heal, we advocate and organize for justice collectively. So I think any way that we can support virtual, in-person, online spaces of connection. So connection to help heal from different types of trauma or conflict, also connection to educate, and also encourage those traditional cultural practices to support what that education can look like, because it's minimized. It's often looked to as, okay, it's not evidence-based. We do have evidence. The evidence is in our songs, it's in our tattoos, it's in our language itself. Our language is the source of so much treasure and knowledge. So anyway, any way that we can connect with each other, dialogue, talanoa, talk story, and really uplift those cultural practices that are not deemed necessarily scientifically rigorous or evidence-based. We'll challenge that. See what happens when our children, when intergenerational family members are coming together and doing these things together. See what happens from that. And I can guarantee, and I wasn't raised traditionally, just as even an observer or someone who has participated in different cultural protocols and family ceremonies, the healing that comes from that, the strength and the power and the filling of your cup comes from that. So.
Amen. That is so great. Thank you all for your participation. I want to leave it our closing remarks with Keith, since he started us off and he's much better at articulating around these issues than I am. But wow, what a great discussion. Thank you.
Oh, thank you so much, Jake. And I'll have to say, I don't know if I'm as good as you at wrapping these things up. So when we think about this here, all these great comments, and I want to I'll close off by talking about just briefly the importance of connection and how I just thought that was such a great point. And also, Robert, what you had mentioned as well about having honest conversations. When I think about the process of having a strength-based approach, and essentially the question in my mind that mulls through my mind quite often when I think about our culture and what we have to offer the world. Because many times we look at what do we need, right? What can we receive? And in my mind, I think to myself, well, we have a lot to offer. And we have a lot to offer in ways of therapy, in ways of understanding yourself. Of course, there are things that to improve, and there are things that every culture can improve. My constant, or one of my overriding thoughts is always just what can we offer? Where are our strengths? And I think that point in which Puna had mentioned in connection, is something that perhaps we can improve on, maybe within this context. But I also think that it's also a strength. And one of the reasons why I mentioned that is in our mourning process. I always think about that and how we mourn when there's a death in the family. There's this collective experience that we have, and I think it's something perhaps that we can tap into to offer to the rest of the world as an opportunity to connect and to show how we support one another. And so I'll leave with those type of final thoughts there. That there are some great things that we have, some great strengths. Of course, there are things that we can improve, but my overall thought, perhaps I don't know if I'm too optimistic, is that we have much more good within our culture to offer to the world than perhaps deficit. But perhaps we have not had the chance to tap into everything in a way that we can share it with the world. And so as I consider family life education practices with Pacific Islanders, part of my focus in moving forward is tapping into the good and the things that we do effectively, and how that can perhaps be applied to mainstream as well, so that they can receive the benefit that we receive from the things that we do in our culture. So I'll leave those thoughts, and thank you, and big thanks to Jake and everybody for your participation. Malo, and have a wonderful day.